criticism. Britain believes, nevertheless, that the Anglo-French action can open the way to new opportunity for the United Nations and the world. Here's the story of what happened and why. The countries of the Middle East are important in many ways. Of world routes and air routes. And they're the most vital source of oil in the whole world. First, let's look at Palestine as it used to be. For some 30 years, tension has steadily mounted over the Palestine question, fostered by the quarrel between Arab and Jew. During long years of unrest, it was Britain who held the international mandate. The task was thankless and difficult, with British troops and police employed in maintaining. These pictures recall and document that uneasy period. When Britain relinquished the mandate, a short but violent conflict between Israel and Egypt in 1948 ended in an armistice which has never blossomed into a peace. The United Nations police force was to have been established. It was never formed. True, United Nations observers investigated incident after incident and reported back. Over 200 United Nations resolutions proved totally ineffective. Next, revolution in Egypt, and before long, Colonel Nasser became dictator. In Cairo, as in other Middle Eastern capitals, popular endorsement of this ominous event produced scenes of frenzied acclamation. Promises of peace and prosperity for every Egyptian explain the enthusiasm for a regime which has proved incapable of fulfilling them. Meanwhile, Britain offered friendship by agreeing to withdraw from the Canal Zone, surely an earnest of her sincere desire for good relations with Egypt. Soon afterwards, a significant visit to Egypt was paid by Mr. Shapilov, Russia's new foreign minister. It seemed certain that a bargain was being struck between Nasser and Shapilov, and so it proved to be. The first evidence was apparent during a big military parade in Cairo. Russia was supplying arms for Nasser's often declared intention of wiping Israel off the map. The climax came when Nasser seized the Suez Canal, an international waterway. To Britain and France, this was a danger signal that the whole Middle East might soon be aflame. They therefore reinforced their Mediterranean garrisons as an insurance against a sudden outbreak. Cairo in 1956 reminded many of Berlin in 1939. Warlike signs in the streets, together with violent radio propaganda, starkly revealed the mood of Egyptian defiance. Nasser himself created and sustained the uncompromising and bellicose attitude. He'd made no secret of his intentions. He'd already seized the canal. What next? At this tense moment, on the 29th of October, Israel struck. Routing the Egyptians, Israeli columns swept forward across Sinai towards the canal. Who knows how far they might have gone? The canal was a natural anti-tank ditch, and Nasser's obvious next line of defense. It had to be protected from war. It was also the only place where Britain and France could physically intervene. Together on the 30th of October, Britain and France issued a forthright warning to both countries. Israel was prepared to heed it. Egypt refused point blank. The Anglo-French operation was planned with care and skill to achieve its objective with the minimum loss of life. In the Mediterranean, aircraft carriers and other warships were ready to take part in the action. And for the first time in history, attacking forces announced their objectives and the time of the attack. At additional risk to air crews, the Egyptian people were warned by precise and repeated broadcasts to keep away from airfields and other specified military targets. The briefing of Royal Air Force pilots was clear and precise. Their targets were exclusively military, such as airfields and the Egyptian aircraft on them, mostly Russian-built fighters and bombers. As well as the Royal Air Force, the Fleet Air Arm played its part in the attack. It flew many sorties, every one carried out with meticulous care and the utmost accuracy. After the attack on Egyptian airfields came the assault on Port Said. Paratroops were flown across on the 5th of November. These are men of a British paratroop brigade. On landing, they went into swift and brilliantly successful action. Before nightfall, seeing that resistance was hopeless, the Egyptians in Port Said agreed to discuss surrender terms. Then, on orders from Cairo, our offer was rejected, and fighting was resumed at 10:30 p.m. local time. Early next day, Royal Marine commandos carried out a landing by helicopter. This action, apart from being most spectacular, was also unique. Simultaneously, Allied forces landed from the sea against an impressive pall of smoke arising from an oil storage tank fired by the Egyptians. The necessity for the seaborne attack on Port Said, which had in fact been captured virtually undamaged, was due solely to the rejection of the surrender terms. But now, Allied troops had to go ashore to overcome Egyptian resistance in the streets of the town. This second operation, now unavoidable, brought the only significant damage and casualties. After the assault, troops moved on into the town, and a considerable build-up followed. Even now, the fighting in Port Said was of short duration. British armor was quickly in command of the situation here, and it wasn't long before numbers of the civilian population began to emerge. Some of Nasser's troops had fought in civilian clothes. In fact, it was often difficult to distinguish civilians from soldiers.